Good morning, everyone. This is the Friday, May 29th meeting of the School Building Project Committee, School Building Committee. First, I will do a roll call attendance. Ken Aries.
Here.
Brian Baer.
Here.
Allison Borchers.
Here.
Chris Coleman. I don't think he's here yet. Sarah Cronin.
Here.
John Cummings.
Here.
Charles Donahue.
Here.
Charlie. Pam Dukeman.
Here.
Abby Hanscom.
Present.
Nancy Hyde.
Here.
Lemma Jean-Baptiste. I don't think
Here.
she's on. Oh, you are? Okay, great. Josepha.
Here.
Carol Lewis.
Here.
Michelle Miller.
Here.
Tony Mullen.
Here.
Emily Parks.
Here.
Kate Scales.
Here.
And Maya Plotkin is here as well. Okay, I'd like to recognize the live stream to provide real-time public access to the activities of the School Building Committee, and it's available online. The meeting is also being recorded for later broadcast on Westwood Media Center's platforms. So, moving into the chair's report. So update on project and process. The real purpose of today's meeting and where we are is the evaluation subcommittee has met about 6 times since January for a total of about 12 hours. And we've now gone through the evaluation matrix, and which we'll be presenting on, and have a recommended option to present to the School Building Committee today. So we will present that today for your consideration. There's no vote on it today. The next steps are at our June 12th meeting. We will be going through sustainability options, and this group as a whole will decide what sustainability options we want to include in the project. There will be some guidance from the Sustainability Subcommittee, which is meeting this coming week to explore those options in depth. So there will be a recommendation from that committee. But we'll spend the June 12th meeting really focusing on sustainability. And then on the June 19th meeting, we will focus a little bit more on cost, including a not to exceed number. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And we will also take a vote on the final project, the recommended option, and the submission of the PSR report, which is sort of what we've all been working for in this phase of the feasibility project. Assuming that the vote is a go on both of those items, then the PSR report will be submitted to the MSBA in early July. We expect, we hopefully anticipate approval of that in August. And that's at that point is when we move into the schematic design phase for the final project option. So that's where we are. Are there any questions on the project process or updates? Or I should mention there's a community forum this Thursday, June 4th at 7 a.m. There's a Zoom link, and people can also dial in via phone. And that's where we're going to be presenting essentially the same thing we are presenting to you today. So I think Chris has joined us, or his chair has joined us. Chris,
Maya?
can you just give, yeah?
Oh, can I ask a question?
Sure.
There was an email that went out yesterday from the School Building Committee. Was that correct? The wording? No. Okay.
So no, it wasn't. And I should mention that as well. When we drafted the letter, we had anticipated that that letter would go out this afternoon or on Monday. So in it, it had said that the evaluation subcommittee had presented to the SBC. Then in further discussions, we thought, you know what, we should give people as much time notice of the forum as we can. So we sent it out yesterday, but we had inadvertently neglected to change that language. So yes, thank you, Brian, for raising that. That's an important point. Apologies for the error there. It should have read, they will be presenting at 8 a.m. This morning. So that's where we are.
And I think, though, it said that we'll be presenting a final option today, or did I misread that? Okay.
The subcommittee is presenting its recommendations today, but there's no vote today.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so it's just the presentation. Then we've got a couple weeks to think about it, to ask questions, to get feedback at the community forum. And then the actual vote from this committee will occur on June 19th.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yep. Chris, can I just get a hi from you for roll call?
Hi.
Great, thank you. Okay, are there any more questions on update on the project progress, process updates? Nope. Okay, I'm going to get into it. So I want to do a quick update just to the building project PDP submission. As you will recall, we submitted the PDP, and one section of the PDP talked about the number of sections we would have of classrooms per grade. Since then, we sort of looked at the issue a little bit further. In the PSR process, we looked at all of the enrollment data we had and the educational programming, and we decided that we were actually going to reduce the number of classrooms in two of the sort of categories, in two of the populations. So the number of classrooms for the 315 population remained the same, but for the 560 population, we went, instead of doing 5 sections per grade, we went to 4 sections per grade. And for the 685 population, we went from 6 sections per grade to 5 sections per grade. We're comfortable with these revised numbers. They align with all of the data we have and with the MSBA guidelines, which are similar to our guidelines, the school committee guidelines. We note them now, however, because the new plans the plans that you see today and the PSR will reflect these new numbers. So I just wanted to make a note of that. Does anyone have any questions about that? No.
Did you?
Does that mean that the classrooms will be covered by the MSBA funds?
Yes. So originally, when we had the extra section in those two populations, we had requested that they be covered by the MSBA, but we wouldn't have known whether or not they agreed to do that until later in the process. And those number of classrooms would have been above what they typically would have covered in their baseline. So it would have been an ask from the MSBA. Now we're at the number of classrooms that should all be covered by the reimbursement.
What are the new enrollment numbers then? The planned?
So there weren't really new enrollment numbers. The enrollment numbers we're keeping the same, the 560 population, the 685 populations. But I think, at the beginning of the process, we were sort of looking at, the sky's the limit kind of thing, thinking it's easier to pull out than to add. And just looking at it more and looking at sort of the fiscal, when the cost estimates were coming in, lining that up with the numbers, with the projected numbers, and with the educational programming that we have and the school committee's guidelines, we realized that those extra classrooms probably were not needed and really would have fallen 100% on the taxpayer instead of getting a portion reimbursed. And so we decided we could live without those, and we would still be well within the MSBA guidelines. Emily, is that accurate? Do you have any?
Yeah, no, that is accurate. I would just say that this issue of enrollment projections is one that we've looked at pretty carefully. And so the additional step we had taken was that we commissioned our own enrollment projection study just to sort of like cross-check it with the MSBA's numbers. And based on that, we now have 3 sets of enrollment projections. We feel totally comfortable that the design enrollments that we've agreed on with the MSBA make sense.
All right, any other questions on that? No? Okay, great. So now we're going to get into the presentation of the evaluation criteria for the shortlist options and what ultimately the recommended option is. John sent around an email earlier this morning. We were working up late into the night last night on the presentation. So the one that John sent this morning is the current one. The one that you may have received, in the earlier emails is a little bit out of date. And I apologize for that. But we did want to make sure we provided you with all the information that we felt you needed for this conversation. So hopefully you can access the one from this morning. If not, I think Emily and I are going to present it on the screen. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily to take it away. Oh, and I should mention, any members of the evaluation committee and absolutely Doran, Whittier, and Compass, if Emily or I miss any points that you think are relevant, please interrupt us and jump in. Anything that you think that we need to discuss more.
Okay. So are you able to see the slideshow now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So
can I just say I'm not able to see it?
oh,
You're
Is
not?
anybody else having that problem, or is it just me?
Good for me.
This is Chris. I can see it.
I can
Okay.
see it.
I'll pull it up on my phone then. My screen's gone black, so I'll pull it.
okay, great. All right, so I'm going to very quickly just reorient us to where we are here, and then we will jump into some of the thinking of the evaluation subcommittee. So as you recall, we have throughout this process, the feasibility study, been looking at sort of three major buckets of options. That is a Hanlon only option for design enrollment of 315, a Hanlon and Deerfield consolidation for a design enrollment of 560, and a Hanlon and Sheehan consolidation for design enrollment of 685. And then within each of those major buckets, there were different approaches. So you could see at Hanlon, we looked at a renovation only, add reno, and new. For the Hanlon Deerfield consolidation, add addition reno or new, and for Hanlon Sheehan, add reno or new. So you may recall that initially we had 15 options presented to us by Doran Whittier, and we went through a process as a committee and narrowed that 15 to the short list. And so those little white boxes on the screen represent the options that are currently on the short list and that we are in the process of evaluating now. Here's a quick snapshot of the options that are being considered. The one option, which is just the base repair option, isn't shown here, but that is one of the options on the short list. So what we're considering, and these numbers refer to the number that the option was when we had 15 different options. So option 6 is an all-new Hanlon for 315 students, obviously at the Hanlon site. Option 7 is an all-new Hanlon for 560 students at the Hanlon site. Option 10 is an all-new school for 560 students at the Hanlon site. So these are the same design enrollment, but the designs themselves differ. And then we had option 4, an add reno for 685 students at Hanlon. Option 11, a new school for 685 students at Hanlon. And then option 15, a new school for 685 students, but at the Sheehan site. So just quickly, I the base repair up here. I want to remind you that the color coding refers to the fact these spaces in red. That's because the size of the spaces is less than 90% of the MSBA guideline. And one of the things that we've been thinking about as we've been evaluating these options is the extent to which the base repair only would meet the criteria that we set out in the educational program. And clearly, with the base reno, you don't have, the base repair, you don't have the opportunity to address some of those issues. And then here, I just wanted to tease out some things, and Rob, please jump in if there are additional things that you want to highlight. But there have been some changes to the plans between the short list and this moment, and that's because Doran Whittier has gone back and done some further thinking about how to situate the to situate things on the site. So you can see here for the ad Reno at Hanlon, that now they've sort of put in some of the fields here out back. We can see these things. They've dropped in the play areas, made a few changes to the parking and car loops.
And we should just mention here that the location of the fields and the parking in each of these is subject to change. This is more of a test fit to make sure that they would all fit on the site. But we haven't, once we have a final design, we'll get into real discussions about proximity and location and things like that.
Mm-hmm. You can see here some changes that have been made from the previous site plan to the current plan. This is for the all new Hanlon for 315 students. One of the things that they've been working on is seeing if they can fit our request for an 11v11, 7v7 Little League field here. And they also, Rob, maybe you could just clarify here, we're only showing one entrance to the site.
Right. Yeah. We were exploring one or two entrances. Previously, we had two separate entrances. In this scenario, we're showing one. And as you'll see through several of these options, we continue to explore that. Yeah, in this particular option, we were looking at having one entrance on the south end with a parent loop and a bus loop.
Yeah. Okay. This is the all new Hanlon the tree design is how we're referring to it. You can see again here, they've situated the fields down out on along the Gay Street side of the property. We have our separate bus and car loops, and then they've started to drop in some of the play areas out here by the cafeteria and the outdoor learning.
And the other thing I think they did on that one is they flipped the tree the other way.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's actually critically important. So, Rob, do you want to talk about why the design has changed?
Yeah. So in the process between the PDP and the PSR, we've continued to investigate the site, and in speaking with in reviewing this with our geotechnical engineer, they found that there's a very high likelihood of some ledge that's on the northern end of the building. So previously, where we had located the gym and the cafeteria, we decided to make some moves in shifting that a little bit. So one of the things we did is we actually located the building further east. Number one, to minimize the disturbance of the existing natural landscape and trees, but also an effort to minimize by rotating that public wing, we're minimizing our exposure to potential ledge. And so that was one of the key factors. So the organization of the building and the adjacencies and all of that remains the same. We've just rotated it slightly to accommodate that.
Great, thanks. And Rob, maybe I should just let the expert continue talking about what you want to say about this.
Yeah, so the similar thing with this plan, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, that was the original layout where we had it oriented north-south. So what we did is reoriented the plan so it's east-west, while still maintaining, needing to have the classrooms have a north-south exposure for daylighting. And so we still kept the same intent regarding the public and private spaces, the idea of having the classrooms be facing out into nature, into the woods, but just oriented the building differently to avoid some of that potential ledge that we might expect in that northern section there. And so both of these options again explore the two entrance idea. So from the south, you would have a parent loop that would loop around, and from the north, you'd have buses come in. You've got a number of parking spaces on both sides, This is in both option 7 and 10 were very similar ideas in terms of site circulation. But so you've got opportunities for faculty, parking, and then visitors and so forth. But a clear separation of entrances between buses and cars. These would be, enter and exit on each side. So the northern entrance would also be an exit. The southern entrance would also be an exit.
Rob, would you expect an elevation change within the building there, or extending
No.
into the site like that?
No, we actually looked at the contours quite extensively as well, and which also feeds into some of the costs that you'll see, when looking a little bit more closely at the amount of cut and fill that would be needed to kind of level out the area for the building. There's a fair amount of earth moving that would be necessary. So we're not anticipating that there would be any sort of a level change. It would be all, the first floor would be all the first floor, and then the second floor, but and as well as some retaining walls. So we'll get into that a little bit later in the cost, but some of that analysis was done so that we could account for some of the costs associated with that.
Okay. All right. Rob, you're on a roll. Would you like to talk about that?
Yep. So again, the primary difference here is we in this option, we were exploring just the northern entrance. Again, separation of buses and cars and, integral parking. We didn't spend too much time on rotating and revising the location of this concept because we knew that we could do it as shown in option 7. So if this option is selected, we can certainly continue to manipulate the building to accommodate the ledge issue.
And then the final one.
And then option 15, this is the new 685 on the Sheehan site. And here, one of the primary things was that we had, in review with our traffic consultant, we found that the coming in off of Pond Street really didn't make sense, and that the better of the two options was to come in off of High Street. And so by doing that, we've had to reduce the amount of field space. So previously we squeezed on 11v11 soccer field. Now we've got a 7v7 soccer field due to this change. And just due to the site constraints and the shape of the plot of land that we have to work with, it was pretty difficult to find alternative areas for the building to go. There really aren't many options considering the wetlands boundaries on the east side and then the site boundaries. So anyway, those were the major moves that we made on this site.
Great, thanks, Rob. All right, so the evaluation matrix. So up on the screen, this is the matrix that we were using during the PDP phase. So at that time, when we were trying to narrow to a short list, we had 6 categories and 6 evaluation criteria, and that was how we determined the short list. During this next phase, the evaluation matrix that we're using, I would say, is considerably more detailed. And so you may recall we already presented this matrix and the committee approved it. We have 5 major categories: education, site, town impact, security, sustainability, and construction impact, and then cost. And each of those 5 categories has subcategories so that we have 14 criteria. And each one of those criteria has some guiding questions that are associated with it. And then each option for each criteria is receiving a score of 1 to 5. So I'm just going to jump in here. So the first major category is education, and the first criteria is educational guidelines. The guiding questions that we have here are: how well does the option support and align with the desired educational experiences outlined in the building-based guiding principles for the design in the district's educational program narrative? And then, how well does the building organization support community and collegiality among students and staff? And how does this alternative retain the small school feel? So all of the questions about the criteria really reflect, I would say, all of the work that was done in the visioning workshops, in the community forums, and meeting with principals and educators, et cetera. So you'll see that basically all of the new options scored the most, got the most number of points with either 4 or 5 points. But the highest scores, the 2 5s here, were given to the design that we're calling tree. And so option 7 and option 11 here, they're both the same design, but for different design enrollments. So this is the 560 design enrollment and the 685 enrollment. And I'm just going to put them up here. Basically, the new options clearly were designed specifically with the design criteria in mind. And so that's why they tended to score more highly. They were able to meet the criteria we were looking for: classrooms sort of grouped in proximity, small neighborhoods of classrooms. They had adjacencies to extended learning areas, to breakout spaces, lots of space for adult collaboration, instructional spaces that provide access to daylight and views of the outdoors. So the designs really, fit those things that were really important to us. I would say the challenge was that we really wanted to take a look at the differences between this tree design and the E design, and to tease out if we had a preference for one over the other. And so we did have the principals spend quite a bit of time looking at that question, and the strong, unanimous preference of the principals is the tree design. And so I just want to highlight some of the things that they noted. They preferred the way that the grade level neighborhoods are arranged in the tree design. So in the E design, you can see there are these very distinct grade level neighborhoods, almost like houses here. You have the same thing in the tree design, but there is sort of this connection between more than one grade level, which works with some of the things that we do educationally. So they preferred that. There are some differences in the way that the media center is expressed between the tree design and the E design, and our preference is for the tree design. The media center there is the centralized portion of it is at the heart of these southern classroom wings. It's spread over 2 floors, and that a portion of the square footage for the media center has also been allocated to this early childhood area in the kindergarten and first grade wings. And we really like that. We like how the media center is strategically located by art and STEM. One of our design criteria was to create a separation between public and private space. And both of these designs have achieved that, but we just prefer the way that the division is expressed in the tree over the E. And then finally, the location of the gym in terms of its adjacency to the fields. In the tree design, the gym is located in a way that it's easier to move out to the fields, and then the play spaces are adjacent to the cafeteria. We preferred the adjacency for the tree design as compared to the E. So for those reasons, the tree design received 5 points and the E received 4. And then in terms of the other two options, you can see here that the ad reno received 3 and the reno only received 1. Clearly, the base reno of Hanlon really doesn't provide an opportunity to address any of the educational criteria that we had articulated. And the ad reno does provide some opportunities, but due to the fact that you're using the existing building, we really wouldn't be able to create some of those important things to us, like the extended learning areas in some grade level, and for some of the grade levels. So that was a drawback. I'll stop there. Any questions?
Yeah,
No.
I just wanted to confirm, Emily. So the number of classrooms has been reduced, but the capacity of the schools is the same?
That's correct. So the number of classrooms that are currently in the designs are in line with the MSBA's ratios, right? So they have a formula. They have a formula for how many classrooms are needed for a particular design enrollment, and this meets that criteria. Earlier in the process, we had considered whether or not we wanted to have some additional classrooms above and beyond that. I think we just wanted to feel secure about the enrollment projections, but having looked at those now, we think they're correct.
So do you know what range of students per classroom we're in? I know Westwood has some guidelines.
We do, and so our guidelines are for K-2 are 18 to 22, and for 3 to 5 are 18 to 24. And the MSBA guidelines aren't expressed exactly the same way, but they're close. Can somebody from Dorn Whittier just remind me what they are? Kindergarten, I think, is 18, correct?
Yes, I believe that's right. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now.
Brian, as I recall, I think whereas ours are 18 to 22, I think theirs are 18 to 23. I mean, it's that similar is my recollection.
Okay, you said with the 3 enrollment and studies, you're very comfortable that we'll be within those ranges for many years to come.
Yes, yes.
This is Chen. That just a comment on the enrollment is that MSBA's enrollment number, if you look carefully in terms of the growth, is that their final enrollment, the enrollment option that they gave for this project is the very end, the end of the 10-year projection. So they anticipate a slow growth over time. So the number, the 315, 560, and the 685 represent the final enrollment number. I think that's one way to look at it.
Right.
Excuse me, Emily, this is Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick question. When you, if you can go back to the slide with the tree and the E, or the tree and the C. So I'm just curious, is there a difference in anticipated construction costs between these two models?
No. You'll see when we get further on in the cost estimates, they are very similar.
Okay.
I mean, the subtleties are so slight that it doesn't really make that much of a difference in the overall. It's minimal in terms of the larger number.
Just a suggestion. First, I want to commend the work that everyone has done on this. This is great. And I'm not a teacher, so I certainly value what Emily is sharing from what the principals are saying about the layout. But if there was a question about that, I would just strongly suggest that emphasizing that there is no significant anticipated construction cost increase with the tree model. I mean, the tree model looks great and seemed very valid points that were raised as to why the tree model was the preferred model.
Yeah, Chris, we do speak to cost later in the presentation, so we will address that point expressly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're on row 1 of the matrix here, where we're only considering sort of those educational questions. Should I move on, or is there anything else on that question?
Yeah, no, I think the other thing I'd follow up on Brian's point. I mean, day 1 in 2023, we don't expect to be anywhere close to the 560 in the school.
That's correct. So the 560 is the MSBA's enrollment. They projected 10 years out. That's the peak enrollment. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so the next category is called growth and future, and the guiding questions there are: how well does the building organization support the potential for future growth, building expansion, and/or changes in student needs and educational delivery models over the life of the building, 70 plus years? And so what I would say here is, when we took a look at it, it's clear that the Hanlon site affords more flexibility for future expansion, and that's just related, frankly, to the size of the site, and that the new designs and sort of the organization within the building provides more flexibility in terms of being able to adapt and respond to changes in educational delivery. And so for that reason, you'll see here that the new options at the Hanlon site receive scores of 5. And then the Ad Reno, again, at the Hanlon site, the site supports a lot of flexibility and potential for future growth, but the addition and renovation doesn't allow for the same kind of design within the building. And so we think it's not as flexible in terms of educational delivery. So that received 4. And then the new design at Sheehan, it's a new design. The design itself meets the educational needs, and we think provides for that future flexibility. But as Rob talked about a bit before, the site itself is clearly very tight, and it would be very difficult to expand in the future on that site. And the renovation only, for reasons that we've talked about, it doesn't really address sort of the flexibility for the educational delivery. So we also gave that a 3. Questions on this? Okay. All right. The next one is outdoor learning and connection to nature. The guiding question here is: how well does the building support outdoor learning opportunities and a strong connection to nature? So here, all of the new designs that are at the Hanlon site received 5s. This idea of creating a connection to nature and supporting outdoor learning opportunities, I would say, was a strong theme that emerged during the visioning process. And as Dorn Whittier have been designing these buildings on the Hanlon site, they've really been talking about the idea of school in the woods. And I think that, the design itself is looking very intentionally to make the connections to the outdoors and to provide those outdoor learning spaces. And so these options were given a 5. The new option at Sheehan received a 4. So again, it was designed to include things like outdoor learning spaces. But I think that this slightly lower score just reflects the fact that the site itself doesn't present the same kinds of opportunities for that connection to nature. The Hanlon site, for example, is adjacent to some trails in the woods, so there are some exciting opportunities there. The Ad Reno at the Hanlon site received a 3 without the opportunity to move the building and to locate it intentionally on the site. It was just more difficult to do some of the things that we see in the new designs, and although some opportunities, and then a little bit less so for the Reno. Any questions, thoughts? Okay, so I will move on to impact to other schools. The guiding questions here are: how does the design enrollment impact the size of the remaining schools? How well does the project address equitable class size? And how well does the project address educational delivery across the district? So the 2 options here that involve Hanlon only, so the base Reno or the new Hanlon for 315, received the lowest scores. And that's because those projects positively impact the fewest number of students across the district. So it would provide some benefit for 315 students, but it doesn't address some of the needs in other parts of the district. The highest scores went to options with the 560 design enrollment. So the 560 design enrollment is a consolidation of Deerfield and Hanlon, which are the two smallest schools in the district. And throughout this process, we've had a lot of discussion about some of the very real challenges that we have in these very small schools. And there are challenges that are related to creating equitable class sizes and some staffing efficiencies. So consolidating the two very small schools and creating one larger school is very helpful in terms of addressing some of those challenges. And what's more, in the consolidation of Deerfield and Hanlon, the remaining school, Sheehan, is a reasonably sized school that often has historically had 3 sections per grade level. So that's why those got 5s. The 685 consolidation eliminates the very small school challenges of Hanlon, but it leaves Deerfield, the smallest school in the district, still open. Right now, Deerfield is fewer than 200 students, and I think it's a good example of the challenge of very small schools. Next year, we're projecting 4 singleton classes at Deerfield. And so the 685 options didn't score as well because it leaves this remaining issue. And that remaining issue is related to these questions about equitable class sizes. In addition, we sort of end up with a sense of disproportion. So we would have a school of 685 on one hand, and then we would have a school of, around 200 on the other end. And so it sort of doesn't create as even a set of school sizes as does the 560 design enrollment. Any questions or thoughts? Okay. All right, so now we're moving on to a different category, and that category is site. So the first criteria is circulation and parking. The questions that we're looking at there, we're looking at proximity of parking to the main entrance and how the site supports, or whether the site supports, an appropriate number of parking spaces. We're looking for safe, clear, and easily understood circulation routes, a separation of bus, car, and pedestrians, and adequate queuing space for buses, and then safe access in and out of the site. So here you can see that the new options at Hanlon scored the highest. They were designed with this stated criteria in mind, and the size and the location of the site supported the designer's ability to meet that criteria. The ad reno for 685 at Hanlon scored a 2. Since it's a renovation, there isn't the same opportunity to situate the building as strategically on the site. Having said that, though, the designers were able to address the current parking challenges, and that's a big plus. But in this design, the bus queue is right up against the road, which we see as a significant disadvantage. And so the subcommittee scored that a 2. Oops. The new option at the Sheehan site also scored a 2. Again, there is ample parking in that design, and there are separate car and bus areas, but the subcommittee had concerns that the bus queue isn't long enough there, which is related to some of the challenges with the site and the location of the site on Pond Street. And again, the bus queue is right up against the road. And so we scored that a 2. And then the reno only, we scored a 1. Basically, with the reno only, we're left with all of the current challenges and safety concerns, particularly the fact that cars are backing up onto Gay Street. there isn't a separation for buses and cars in the loop, and the current loop is quite small. So that was our thinking. Any questions or thoughts? Okay, next criteria is access to fields and site fit. So here we are looking at access to fields, playgrounds, and outdoor learning. And we pose the question about the scale of the building to the site. Is the building size proportionate to the site that it sits on? So I think what you'll see here is that all of the options at the Hanlon site scored higher than the Sheehan site on this particular criterion. And the new options at the Hanlon site scored the highest, scored the 5s. So in those designs, the designers are able to locate the playing fields closer to the road with adjacent parking. And then in those designs, the playgrounds are adjacent to the cafeteria, which we think will work well for recess. The outdoor learning spaces are adjacent to the classroom wings, and we don't have any concerns about the size of the building with respect to the size of the site. The ad reno scored a little bit lower. In that particular design, we weren't able to situate the fields in front of the building close to the roads. As you see in the new options, the fields are located out behind the school. Obviously, the current building remains where it is, and so that's where the fields had to be located, back behind the building, which we don't think is as advantageous. And then the new building on the Sheehan site, I would say that we have concerns about the size of the building and that it not being proportionate to the size of the site. And then also we noted that there's a long distance between where the parking is located and the baseball fields. Any questions? Okay. All right, so now we're on to another category. This is town impact. And the first criteria here is redistricting. Our guiding questions were, to what degree does the project retain neighborhood communities? What are the redistricting impacts on busing, considering travel time, number of students impacted? And how well does the project meet building utilization goals? So I'll just talk sort of broadly about redistricting, knowing that we had a presentation from our redistricting consultant at a school committee meeting, and then we also had an entire community forum devoted to redistricting. So we have talked about that in some detail. But basically, the redistricting consultant sort of provided us with how we would go about redistricting based on the different options that we were looking at. And so here on the screen, we have the existing district map. And then this was the proposed district map if we did a consolidation of Hanlon and Deerfield with 560 students, excuse me, on the Hanlon site. And what you'll notice here is that redistricting is actually a relatively simple proposition based on the consultant's analysis. It would be possible to create a Hanlon-Deerfield district basically by erasing this line between the two districts and simply putting those two districts together. And so in this redistricting scenario, the other 3 current districts wouldn't be impacted. We currently have a high percentage of students in the Deerfield district who are bus riders. And so in this sense, they would continue to ride the buses, but they would have to travel a little bit further down Gay Street. And we might have some students who are currently walkers in the Deerfield district who would also have to be bused. So there may be some small impact on our transportation in that sense, but the impact isn't that significant. By comparison, the redistricting for a consolidation of Hanlon and Sheehan proves to be more complicated. So you can see in this one, we have a consolidated Hanlon, and for 600, we have 685 school on the Hanlon site. And so there is no longer a Sheehan district in this scenario. And what you can see is that we now would need to get a large number of students over to the Hanlon site, and that would involve impacting all of the districts except for the Downey district. So it really would be sort of a wholesale redistricting where 400 and some students would be impacted in terms of how we would have to redraw the lines. So we think that there would be significant disruption in this scenario, and also clearly the transportation impact is significantly more complicated as you have to move a larger number of students from one side of town to the other. In this option, we took a look at a consolidated building with a design enrollment of 685, but here at the Sheehan site. And it turns out that this is even more complicated than the previous scenario. Effectively what you end up with here is the Downey school, kind of one school located on this side of town geographically, and then the other schools over on this side of town, which means that you have to move a lot of kids from one side of town to the other. You can see again that other than the Downey district, everybody is impacted here, and the new Sheehan district ends up being quite a large geographic area, moving kids over to that site. We actually, when we first took a look at this with the redistricting consultant, this seemed like so undesirable that we asked if they could go back and take another look and see if there was any other way to come at this. And they did that. They did provide another option, but frankly, that option, it wasn't much of an improvement. So the recommendation of the redistricting consultant was fairly clear that from a redistricting perspective, the Deerfield Hanlon at the Hanlon site for 560 was the recommended option. It impacts the smallest number of students and families. It has the least impact to current traffic patterns. The resulting elementary school district boundaries are reasonable in terms of things like student population density, where the students are concentrated, in terms of geographic layout, using major roads, physical landmarks to set boundaries. This has the greatest potential for student walkers across the whole district. Very importantly, it maintains existing neighborhoods, and it also creates a favorable utilization rate across the other schools. So for all of those reasons, that seems to clearly be the best option. So if I go back to the matrix here, you'll see that the Deerfield Hanlon consolidation options, number 7 and 10, receive 5s. We gave 4s to Hanlon only options. So clearly you don't, there is no redistricting in those options. And so there isn't an impact there. But when we got to this question about how well does the project meet building utilization goals, if we leave 5 elementary schools in the district, the building utilization isn't as efficient as we see in the 560 consolidation. And then we gave the 685 design enrollments at the Hanlon site 2s for the reasons I discussed, and clearly the sort of least desirable redistricting option is 685 at Sheehan. Questions about that? Okay, the next criteria is traffic. The questions are, what is the impact of the traffic on the neighborhood and town? And then questions about walkability. What is the impact on overall net increase in cars versus walkers? So we have had some traffic studying done, and then this is also clearly related to the redistricting question. So here we did score most highly the Hanlon only. And I think that's because really we framed the question here in terms of impact, and there would be no change there in terms of impact. for the 560 design enrollments at the Hanlon site, there would be some impact, but as I just noted, we would have to move some kids who currently take a bus to Deerfield down to Hanlon. So there would be some impact, but it feels like that traffic impact wouldn't be terribly significant. Whereas in the other options, we're just moving a much larger number of kids, a greater distance across town. And so those options did not score as highly. Questions on that? I think that the two on the Reno only, my subcommittee members can jump in here if I'm incorrect, but I think that again reflected our concern about the current traffic situation with cars backing up onto Gay Street.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, great. All right, at this point, I'm tagging off to Maya, so I will stop sharing and you're ready to share, Maya?
Yep. So just looking at the clock, it's 9 o'clock. Are people okay to stay on? We have a little bit more to get through. My guess is it might be about half an hour more until the meeting ends. Is that okay for everyone? Yeah, okay.
May I have a meeting with some teachers at 9:15? Is that okay if I just sneak off?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so I'm going to jump in here. Can everybody see?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. You're right, Emily. You can't see everyone when you're talking,
No.
when you're presenting. Okay, so I'm picking up on community use. And in community use, we looked at sports fields, gym space, community space, performance space. Basically, how did these options benefit the community? So you'll see here that the new builds on the Hanlon site all got 5s. Currently at Hanlon, we only have 1 Little League field, but the new site will have, and I'm going to scroll, if you look at all of the new Hanlons, you'll see that they have 1 Little League field, 1 11v11 soccer field. Those are included in the baseline costs that we have. And then we also have a potential for an additional 7v7 soccer field. That would be an additional cost, but there is room on the site for those. All of the new builds on Hanlon have a new gym. There's an easy separation of public and private, so it's easy to host community events, voting or town meeting, or even other, speakers, just without disturbing the academic portion. And the cafeteria does have performance space available. I know that the high school in particular gets pretty tight in the spring, actually all year, but really in the spring. So it would be nice to have another venue for the different performance groups in Westwood. So all of the new builds on the Hanlon site got 5s. The add reno on the Hanlon site was 685. This is option 4. That got a 4. We still have the new fields, but if you look, and I think Emily mentioned this, the proximity to parking for the fields is not as convenient. You'd have to cut through these sort of play areas, and it's a fair distance. So for that reason, we rated that a 4. There is still the new gym, the performance space, and the easy separation of public and private. Then the new building on the Sheehan site with 685 students got a 2. Currently at the Sheehan site, we have 2 Little League baseball fields and 1 large multi-use soccer fields. But if you look at the option, this is number 15. We really only, because the site is tight and the building is fairly large, we'd really only have room for 1 Little League field and 1 7v7 soccer field. So we would have to relocate the remaining fields elsewhere in town. That clearly is an expense to the town, and it would also, given the land in the town, it would be difficult to relocate them. In addition, the Little League field on this site in Plan 15 is very far from the parking lot. And then the Little League field and the 7v7 field are also very tight on the site. They're very close to the outer boundaries of the properties and into the buffer areas. So Even though it still has the new gym, the performance space, and there is an ability to separate public from private, we felt that the disadvantages were pretty great, so we did rate that a 2. And then the existing Hanlon renovation, the baseline renovation, got a 1 because it's not providing anything new for the town. So that's where we were. Any questions, comments? Oh, okay. So moving on to security. Here it's pretty clear all the new builds got 5s here because they're going to be designed purposefully to incorporate the current best practices for security. The ad reno on Hanlon site with 685 got a 4 because while most security measures can be implemented, there may be some limitations due to the fact that this is a renovation and there's an existing building. So that was given a 4. And then the existing Hanlon got a 2. Just because no new security features would be installed in connection with a baseline repair. I should mention here that we will be working with a security consultant and with the police department. We've had initial meetings with police and fire. So security is going to be very well covered in the design for the final project. Any questions on security? Okay. Sustainability is actually fairly similar to security. Again, the new builds all got 5s because we're purposefully designing them to incorporate the sustainability options that this committee will designate. And they'll also, we'll also look at the town goals and align the options with those goals. So any of the new builds got a 5. The ad reno on Hanlon site with 685 got a 4. Again, we will be able to incorporate new sustainability components, but there may be some limitations due to the fact that it is a renovation and there's an existing building. And then the existing Hanlon got a 1 because there's currently no sustainable initiatives in the building. Any questions? All right. Logistics and construction impact. If you recall, when we did the scoring in the PDP section for this category, we did not give any of the options a 5. And the same here, because there will be some impact due to the construction and each of these options. So the highest rating we gave here was a 4. The new builds on the Hanlon site all got 4s. Because it's a new build, students can stay in the existing building without interruption or moving around while the new school is built behind it. There's no phasing necessary. And also because this Hanlon site is large, there's room for construction vehicle access and staging of materials. And hopefully that will be minimal disruption to the existing school. So for those reasons, we gave it a 4. The ad reno on the Hanlon site with 685 got a 2. Because we're adding on and renovating an existing building, we will have to conduct it in the construction in phases, which will entail moving students around the building. As one section is completed, we'd move them in there and then start working on the uncompleted section. So that we saw as a disadvantage. We also noted that students may be in classrooms with walls that are adjacent to construction while the construction is going on. So again, disruption. And because we're using the existing footprint of the building and we're not expanding sort of into the backwoods, the site won't be as big for vehicle access and for material staging. So we would have we'd have more challenges there than we would with a new build on Hanlon. So that got a 2. The new building on the Sheehan site with 685 students also got a 2. While we can construct the new school while the students remain in the existing school, so we wouldn't have to do it in phases, and that clearly was an advantage, but the site is so tight that construction vehicle access and material staging will likely be fairly disruptive to the kids and the students and the faculty in the existing school. And on top of that, the new school is going to be built on existing fields, the soccer fields, the Little League fields. So the town will lose use of all of those fields during construction. we felt those were fairly significant disadvantages. So the new Hanlon Sheehan was given a 2. The Hanlon Sheehan at the Sheehan site was given a 2. And finally, the existing Hanlon renovation got a 1 because we would have to move the students out of the schools into temporary classrooms while the renovation is conducted. Clearly not ideal. So that is the logistics and construction impact. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. So now we're getting into cost. This is the last major category we looked at, and in some ways was the easiest and the most complicated. So the first subcategory is overall cost. During this PSR phase, we did get updated cost estimates. If you recall, we had some cost numbers during the PDP phase that we shared with everybody. Those were refined and updated, and we got a lot more information about the sites and the design in the PSR phase. So we did get updated cost estimates. So in the overall cost category, the scores that you see here are purely looking just at how much the project cost. There is absolutely no other criteria. So it's literally most expensive got a 1 and the least expensive got a 5. So here you'll see that the Hanlon renovation, option number 1, is the least expensive. It got a 5. The new build for Hanlon only got a 4. That's number 6. The new builds for Hanlon and Deerfield got 3s. Those are 7 and 10. And then the add reno for the Hanlon Sheehan consolidation and the new builds for the Hanlon Sheehan got 2s, because those numbers 4, 11, and 15 were the most expensive projects. Again, pure cost. I should emphasize here, so this chart shows the revised numbers, and there's a couple things to note here. First, we, as I mentioned, and I think Rob mentioned this too, we have a lot more information about the site itself, and particularly with respect to existing ledge. So the costs here may look a little bit higher than the ones we saw in the PDP phase. And that's taking into account that there is an increase in cost for the site work, just due to the additional information we received. Secondly, as you may recall, in order to get 2 additional reimbursement points from the MSBA, our project needs to be 20% above the energy code. And the new energy code that's come out is now requiring us to include more energy efficiency components in the baseline to get to that 20%. So a lot of what in the original numbers had been optional sustainability components and were listed as sort of tier 1 and tier 2 are now actually have now actually been incorporated into the baseline costs. Because we need those in the baseline to get those 2 percentage points from the MSBA. And consequently, the premium for net zero energy, which is shown in white, has decreased. It really is just sort of pulling items from tier 1 or tier 2 and bringing them into the baseline. And finally, these costs are higher just because we have more information in general about the design, about the project than we did in the PDP phase. What I really want to emphasize here is that these costs are for relative purposes only right now. So we can score the options against each other. We have a long way to go. We're only about 15% through design. So we have a long way to go with cost estimating. So these numbers should not be viewed as being set in stone in any way. We will, as the SBC will have to come up with a not to exceed number that we'll submit in the PSR report. So that's going to be a number where we tell the MSBA, we know the project will not go above this cost, but we're not really going to get into that today. We'll talk about that over the next couple meetings. And so by the July 19th meeting, we'll have had discussions on what that number should be, what it should look like. But again, that's the sort of outer limit of the project. And we will certainly be working to fine tune the cost over the next 7 months. And once we get to town meeting, we will have a number that I think this committee is very comfortable with presenting to the town. But these numbers, are just, like I said, are for comparative purposes only. Are there any questions just on overall cost? No? Okay, so as you can see, Chris, to your point, numbers 7 and 10, that's the tree and the E at the 560 population. Those pretty much came out very close. We have a more detailed cost sheet that we actually I'm not going to go through now, but so there are a little bit of subtleties between the two, but for the most part, the tree and the E variations that Emily spoke to earlier are the cost the same to construct.
Thank you.
So the next category is net cost to town for all 3 schools. And I would say this is the one where we had the most discussion. It is weighted the highest. I think when we presented the matrix to this committee and the committee approved it, we went through the weight multipliers, but we did feel that the net cost to the town, and we're really talking about capital costs here to address all 3 of the schools, was an important criteria. This criteria also looks at the benefit of the MSBA partnership. So what does that mean? What did we look at? First, we looked at consolidation and really the impact to the school budget of consolidating, where you would take 2 old schools offline and replace them with 1 new school, versus no consolidation, where you still have 2 old schools to maintain and repair. So clearly, the Hanlon-Sheehan consolidation scored a little bit higher here because these are the 2 biggest schools. They would create a bigger savings in capital needs than if we consolidated Hanlon and Deerfield. So those got a little bit of a higher score than the Hanlon-Deerfield consolidations. And we also looked at and in addition, with the MSBA reimbursement, the highest cost projects receive the highest amount of reimbursement. So the more expensive the project, the bigger amount we would get from the MSBA. So again, that's why options 4, 11, and 15 all scored a little bit higher. These are the Hanlon-Sheehan consolidations. We did talk a lot about the impact to the town of giving a school back. So for example, with a Hanlon-Sheehan consolidation, we would give, we would consolidate Hanlon and Sheehan, and we would either give Hanlon back or Sheehan back to the town. And in a Hanlon-Deerfield consolidation, we would be giving Deerfield back to the town. And we felt that that was worth noting in these numbers. So this is the only category where we gave a 0.5 point, or I should say we took away a 0.5 point, because there are implications to the town for taking in a building and being responsible for the capital costs of that building. So for those, for the consolidation options, we deducted 0.5 point from the high score. So 5 went to 4.5 and 4 went to 3.5, just to really capture the idea that the town would be taking a school back and there would be an impact to the town for that. Finally, and then again, with respect to the new Hanlon, you're only solving for 1 school. You still have Sheehan and Deerfield online with capital needs. And on top of that, you're getting a smaller amount of reimbursement from the MSBA. And finally, with the renovation only of Hanlon, you're minimal reimbursement from the MSBA, and you haven't really solved any of the capital issues. So any questions on net cost to the town? If anyone on the committee wants to, chime in here, I know we had a lot of discussion about this category.
Nancy, I would invite Chris Coleman and Pam Dukeman to comment on if they think how we captured that 0.5 deduction, if that resonates with them as a way to inform the public about the potential related costs for a school if it's turned over to the town. I just want to make sure they're okay with that, and if they're not, this would be a good time to hear from them.
This is Pam. Yes, I think that's fine. I think that gives some acknowledgement that, something would have to be done with that building that comes back.
This is Chris. I appreciate what the committee has done, and I agree with Pam. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you guys. Thanks, Nancy. Anything else on the net cost to town?
Can you, and I think I missed this end of the meeting, last meeting, the busing and operational costs, putting a 5 for 7 and 10. Can you just remind me, take me through why that's a 5, given that, you're going to have to be in theory, bus people further, even though there may not be a huge increase in number of buses, you're going to be busing people further from places in Deerfield to the new location.
Sure. So are there any other questions on the net cost before I get to busing?
I had a quick question about it. The estimated costs of running these schools without becoming new schools, like new roofs, new heating. There's a certain cost that we'll be absorbing with the old schools anyway. And I don't know if we could do any estimates of them. Roofs going to be needed and things like that. It's a part of the net.
Yeah. So we tried to capture that. Running the capital costs for the older buildings clearly, as time goes on, will become more and more significant, and they already are. We already see some capital needs there. So that's why we, again, this is all relative, to each other. So that's why we were looking at the Hanlon-Sheehan consolidations as having higher points, because they would solve for both Hanlon, the capital costs issue for both Hanlon and Sheehan. And you'd be left with capital costs for Deerfield, which is potentially a smaller number than being left with capital costs for Sheehan. So that's how we kind of looked at the capital cost issue with respect to the 3 schools.
If I can just hop in, May, I think, Charlie, you're raising a really important point that we think that there's a significant savings in the form of cost avoidance that can be realized through a consolidation where you effectively are, more or less immediately taking 2 buildings that are nearing the end of their useful life, where we have identified capital needs that we know will have to take place within the next few years. And if we can, avoid making those kinds of investments in HVAC replacements or repairs and in roof repairs, that could be seen as a significant savings.
I'm just thinking months from now, when we're beginning to sell this to the public, I think that kind of information is valuable to a lot of people who will be opposed to this building project, that we're going to have a lot of costs no matter what, and just educating people about how costly it is to keep old buildings online. So I think a lot of that documentation that we're doing would be valuable later in answering questions and beginning to say it's just, not running out, just spending a lot of unnecessary money, but there's a lot of money they're going to spend anyway.
Yes, and that is a good point. And I think that when this is presented to the town, we'll certainly look at what would happen if we didn't do the project and what those costs, what the anticipated costs would look like for just keeping these 3 schools, as is up and running. Because I do think, to your point, that is a cost that everybody should be aware of.
This is Brian. Has the town acknowledged that they would want these buildings, or does demolition cost have to be taken into account for this project for the school that's being abandoned?
So I'll let Nancy speak to that. I will tell you that I don't believe we've included demolition costs in our baseline costs. I think we did at one point have a line item that showed what the demolition costs would be, but when we get into what we're doing with the remaining school, you can see that it will go back to the town, but at some point. But I'll let Nancy speak to that.
Yeah, part of this process, there's a step that's involved where we will be putting together a committee to assess what happens with a school building that would be vacated as a result of this consolidation. And what Maya was touching on is the school department needs to look at, does that vacated building serve any purpose as swing space for any reason? That's one of the decisions that needs to be made first. Then if it's not needed, or it's known at a future date when it's not needed, it does become a process of the school committee voting to turn it over to the town, and the town assumes responsibility for it. And I would just refer back to the Colburn School when it was vacated by the school administration. That's an example of a building that was returned to the town. Ultimately, in that case, it was handled in a way that allowed it to be renovated, redeveloped into housing. And ground level retail by a third party developer. In this case, if there's a building that comes to the town, we'll have a committee with representation from the school department and the town, and together we'll determine if it serves a useful purpose for the town. And it may not require demolition, but it may require an investment. And if we go back to that 0.5 adjustment on the net cost to the town, hypothetically, if Deerfield was turned over to the town, the Deerfield would need to be invested in before it could be utilized. So that's what that 0.5 says. So that's what we need to do. We need to undertake a thorough review on what to do with the building. And the MSBA actually requires that we do so.
Anything else on net cost to town?
May I, excuse me, May I just wanted to clarify that in the costs, we do include demolition of the existing building on the site that is affected. We do not include the demolition of schools that are not on the site that's affected.
Right. Thank you, Rob. Okay. So going to busing and operational costs. So this was the category where we looked at the sort of overall transportation and operating cost impact to the district. And, you know, as opposed to capital costs. And this, Tony, to your point, this was really a comparative examination. So the reason that the new builds on the Hanlon site got 5s, even though we know there will be some increase in busing costs, it actually, these options had the least impact on the increase in busing costs, because you're basically just, you know, as Emily mentioned, taking this almost not the same number of kids, but relatively small additional number of children, putting them on buses and then making the buses go a little bit further. So relative to the other options, the increase in busing costs here was the least adverse. It sort of was it had the least impact. In addition, with numbers 7 and 10, you're taking 2 old schools offline, as we mentioned, and operating 1 new school. It will have higher efficiencies in terms of the operational cost of the schools. You know, we're still looking at that, but because, you know, it's going to be a bigger school than the 2 coming off, but certainly in terms of efficiencies, it will be a much more efficient building. There also may be some effect on salaries with efficiencies of specialists and scheduling. Right now, a lot of specialists need to move between schools, but with the consolidation, there will be less movement between the schools. But that is not quite as big an effect on the operational budget. So the ad reno on the Hanlon site was 685, and the new build on the Hanlon site was 685, got 4s here. There's more impact on the busing costs here because you're consolidating with Sheehan, but going to the Hanlon site, which is more centrally located than the Sheehan site, so we felt that the busing impact would be less than if you were going to the Sheehan site. And again, the same as with the other 2 options, you're taking 2 old schools offline, you're operating 1 new school with higher efficiencies, and again, there may be some effect on the salaries given the specialists and scheduling. The new building on the Sheehan site with 685 students got a 3. The busing costs, mainly for the busing costs here, they increased because the Sheehan site is not as centrally located. If you remember back to the map that Emily showed, the Sheehan site is really in the southwest corner of the town. So you're trying to get more people from the other side of town over to Sheehan. So that we gave that a 3 for that reason. Just because the redistricting map is more complicated, the routes would be longer. The new building on the Hanlon site for Hanlon only got a 3 as well. While there aren't any increases to busing costs, which is good, you still are going to be operating 2 old buildings because you still have Sheehan and Deerfield. And you will have, even though you'll have 1 new school with higher efficiencies, but you still will have Sheehan and Deerfield and the operational costs that go along with those. And finally, the existing Hanlon renovation got 1 because you've got 3 buildings online. 2 of which are old and 1 of which has been renovated, but wouldn't have this, might not have the same efficiencies as a new building on Hanlon. Any other questions on busing and operational costs? Any questions at all on the criteria we talked about? Because I'm about to show you the full matrix. Okay, so here we have it. So this is the matrix filled in. It shows we didn't fill in all of the multiplier numbers because then there were just so many numbers on this chart that it looked a little bit confusing. But we did leave the category subtotals so you can see how each category scored. And then at the bottom row, you'll see the totals for each building. For each project. Highest to lowest, option 7 came in the highest, then option 10. Option 7, as you recall, is the tree, as opposed to option 10, which is the E. Both of those are for the 560 consolidation at Hanlon. And then option 11, 6, 4, 15, and 1 all followed. So just based on this criteria, the recommended option of the evaluation subcommittee is option 7. This is new construction. It's the Hanlon Deerfield consolidation of 560 students at the Hanlon site. The informal name is the tree. And this is, again, just a reminder of what it looks like. So this option is the recommendation of the subcommittee. Any questions on the?
I have a question.
Yep.
First of all, I want to commend all of you on all of the work that you've done. I mean, tremendous amount of work. Can we go back to the classrooms and how you decided to reduce the numbers that you were asking for?
Sure. Emily, you want to take this? You're more familiar with this.
So, I mean, I think that part of the confusion is that, frankly, in retrospect, it's not that we're looking to reduce the classrooms now. I think early in the process, we had this notion that we were going to increase the number of classrooms in the building from what the MSBA formula was. And we were feeling, I don't know, maybe a little more
flush
at the beginning of the process. Thought we, you know, at that point we were still in like blue sky thinking. So that was part of it. And then the other part was just that, you know, early on in the process, I think we were feeling like cautious. We just wanted to make sure that we were going to have a building that could accommodate the future. And, you know, let me say that I don't quibble with the MSBA's formula in terms of, this is to Brian's earlier question, the formula that the class size guidelines that they use in their formula are very, very similar to our school committee guidelines. So I think the formula itself is fine. I think that from my perspective, I just wanted to get one more set of enrollment projections so that we could feel entirely confident that the peak design enrollment that we have here is sufficient for the future needs of the town. And I do feel that. I mean, we have the MSBA projections. We have 2 other projections that we've had done, and I think we've triangulated the situation. And I feel comfortable in saying that the peak design enrollment and therefore the number of classrooms is sufficient.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that in light of the changed fiscal situation, I'm glad to see that you're, you know, taking that into account. When we open the school, how many of the classrooms will you be using?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think, you know, so part of that would have to do with where we are with our operating budget and how we want to staff the classes, right? But I guess what I would emphasize is that the number of classrooms is sufficient for the peak enrollment. So if you had class sizes that were at the upper end of our class size limit, say 22, right? That we would have a sufficient number of classroom spaces to accommodate all of the kids within that class size guideline, right? So it might be that when the enrollment is earlier, you might still be using those classrooms, but you might have smaller class sizes, right? 17, 18, something like that.
Mhm. Okay. Okay, thank you.
And if I could add, I think that was one of the, I guess, discussion points that we had when the second or third set of enrollment projections came in, was the concern about having empty classrooms on opening day.
Right. Right. We certainly don't need that. So I feel comfortable with these numbers in terms of the enrollment projections. And then also to your point, I just think that, you know, it's financially responsible to be thinking the way that we're thinking right now. The additional classrooms wouldn't be subject to MSBA reimbursement, and I frankly don't think that they're necessary.
Right. And we're also aware that we do have, you know, we potentially have another project. So we're trying to be as efficient fiscally as we can. So given, you know, our comfort level with the number of classrooms with these numbers, it really was the decision that made the most sense. Anything else on this or the recommended option? Okay. So what happens to Sheehan? So if we move forward, if this committee moves forward with the recommendation of the evaluation subcommittee, that will consolidate Hanlon and Deerfield, which into the MSBA project, which leads Sheehan. And as we know, we have from the start been very focused on the fact that there are 3 schools in need in Westwood. We've heard from the community loud and clear that there are 3 schools. And so we really want to have a plan for Sheehan. Again, this is all on the assumption that this committee accepts the recommendation of option 7. So assuming that, what would happen to Sheehan? So as you may recall, the school committee in a meeting, I'm forgetting when, but in this past few months, allocated some funds to commission a very high-level design study of the remaining schools, something similar to the PDP level of design that we saw earlier. And this was not designated to a specific school. It was just whatever school would remain in the event of a consolidation. That study will commence as soon as the school building committee approves the final project option. So if on June 19th, this committee approves the recommendation of option 7, then the study will commence looking at Sheehan. And again, these funds have already been allocated. So we should have that study, that sort of high-level design study, completed by next spring. In that case, in spring 2021, the school committee will have the results of the design study, and based on that, they'll recommend either an addition renovation to Sheehan or construction of a new building. And at that point, it's in spring 2021 at town meeting, the school committee will then ask the town to fund the next phase of the design. Which is starting from schematic design, which is where we'll be really in July and August on this project, to bidding, all the way to bidding the project for construction. That will take about a year. So in spring of 2022, when the project has been identified and cost estimated out, we are going to ask, the school committee would ask the town of Westwood to actually fund the construction of the Sheehan project. So that's spring 2022 at town meeting. Assuming that vote passes, construction will begin immediately, and then in fall of 2023, construction will be completed and the school should be ready for occupancy. This is the same timeline. This fall 2023 is the same timeline as our current project. So the 2 schools would be opening simultaneously. I should say this is a very tentative time schedule. It's also fairly aggressive and makes a lot of assumptions that, you know, we get the votes we need, we get the work done that we need to get done. It's a pretty aggressive schedule, but it's one that Doran Whittier and Compass are comfortable with. And that's sort of the current plan for Sheehan. Of course, 100% of this depends on the town and what the town is willing to fund. And I know that there's a lot of economic uncertainty, but this is the plan that we would like to present to the public, and what we have in mind in terms of taking care of Sheehan.
Mayor, this is Nancy. I'd like to ask Doreen Whittier to comment on a spring 2022, or say, call that year 2 in a sequence. And being able to open in the fall of year 3. I mean, as I think through it, if there was new construction, that's extremely complicated to position an existing school population with new construction. And if it's an ad reno of some kind, that's also complicated. And my comments are informed by what it was like doing the Downey School addition, partial renovation to the existing building, and also the Martha Jones. And I recall back then it was at least 18 months because a lot of key construction work needed to take place when the building wasn't occupied during summer months. So I have a really hard time envisioning a year 2 Springtown meeting vote that could lead to a year 3 fall occupancy.
If I could jump in on that one, Nancy.
Yes, thanks, John.
Sure. I think the way we're looking at this is could happen is certainly a new building could be constructed and likely occupied by the 2023, but the demolition of the existing building and all of the site work would continue into the fall to get to full project completion. You noted with additions and renovations, that's a lot more complicated. So if it does go that route, I think the chances of a project being completed and occupied by the fall in 2023, if it's additions or renovations, would be quite challenging. Yes.
I think it'd be better than to modify that to give a possible span of time. It's not easy opening a school reno addition during the school year. It's possible, but maybe having a qualifier that would indicate fall 2023, somewhere between then and fall 2024, TBD, something like that. I think you run into problems if you overstate expectations.
No, it's a excellent point. And your point about the ad reno is well taken. And like I said, I think it's a very tight schedule for a new build as well. So I'm happy to revise this.
Also, would this overlap at all with the construction of the project we're talking about now? That's a lot for Westwood in many ways.
Yeah, it would. I mean, and the point of this is really because we see sort of capital needs coming for Sheehan. And I think it's trying to, head those off and spend the money elsewhere. But you're right, 2 big school construction projects going on at the same time is a lot. And again, if the town isn't comfortable with that, then, that's where we are.
If I could add one thing, I think those types of different scenarios would get studied in that initial study period where, in addition to looking at addition and reno versus new, but also timing of construction, does it make sense to extend it out over a different time frame? I think what are the cost implications of doing that? That would be another aspect of that initial study period.
And can I ask, under this scenario, what's the thought process for at least asking for MSBA funding for the Sheehan project?
So I think the deadline for the MSBA, submitting an SOI for the MSBA has either passed or it's coming up. But I think given the COVID-19 situation and all of the work that the administration has had to do just to accommodate learning, there's just no capacity this year to submit an SOI. We certainly can submit an SOI next year, but again, it was even before the pandemic, it was very unlikely that the MSBA was going to approve a project for Westwood when we hadn't even broken ground on the first project that they had approved. Now, the MSBA gets its funding from sales tax, and clearly sales tax has been hit very hard with this pandemic. And we think that future SOIs and future applicants will probably, they're not going to be as generous as they have been, just because they don't have the funding. Their funding is not going to be coming in as much as it had been. And so now I think it's even more unlikely, quite frankly, that we would be accepted into the MSBA program, particularly given, one of the things they look at is the socioeconomic composition of towns. And I don't know. I mean, Chin and Tim, you can weigh in here, but we can certainly put it in SOI next year. I'm really pessimistic that we would be approved.
Tim, I think that that you stated it just about the way I would state it. It's not forbidden. I mean, but I think given their practice about only allowing districts to have one project sort of active at a time, they don't. That's not a set rule, but that is sort of, especially with kind of relatively smaller communities. And I think that but I do think that in the study we would look at that, and if it's desirable, or if we think it's feels that it has a shot at it, we would look at that. It would extend out the timeline, obviously, a couple of years probably.
Yeah, the only time that I'm aware that the only towns that have multiple projects going on with MSBA at the same time tend to be places like Boston and Springfield or something, that the very large community.
Excuse me, Mayor, this is Chris.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to mention that when you talk about two large projects being constructed at the same time, we have a capacity issue when it comes to inspectional services. That would have to be factored in addition to any other town construction project, for example. And I know the select board has not voted on this, but certainly is on their radar screen, a new fire station 1. So I think we have to also balance out the capacity of the inspectional services on the town side. And also, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I'm sure PBC would also have a capacity issue when you're talking about multiple large projects like this.
Yep, and that's a good point. And I think that would also be a component of the design study, right? The town's capacity to have these two projects going on at the same time. Anything else?
Charlie Donny, I'm just looking ahead of this, how things have changed since we've started this project. Looking for any more money and going before in the future with the pandemic and all that, it's a very, very different environment. And I think we need to be doing some strategic thinking about how we get approval for a project like this. About 5 years ago, we started talking about some of these things. And I did a very amateurish study of our competing towns. We compete with about 25 towns in education. And where do our elementary schools stand regarding them? We're very lucky we get a new fire station, police station, library, and high school. But our elementary schools are pretty much at the back of the pack in the school systems we compete with. 70 years old. So I think we need to begin to document, how important this issue is, and to be presenting that to the town. And I'm just thinking of the fantastic advice we've got from Dora Whittier. Maybe in the process of all the work they do, they just have access to data like this. It would be hard for us to get. So we can begin to document where our elementary schools stand in age compared to all these towns we're competing with. And I know we're way behind the back. Just if they could pick that up as a part of their process, that could be very valuable to us later to point out the importance of what we're trying to do. It's just not another casual thing to spend money. It's very, very important. And they may pick those data up on their own when they're doing all these projects. And I just would like to suggest it would be very valuable to us in the future as we're beginning to convince the town that this is important, to show how all these towns we compete with educationally, how far more advanced they are in the age of their schools, elementary school. So I just would like to ask if any help you could give us just with the knowledge you have, because it's going to be important for us to get that information later. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Anything else on this slide? Okay, so now let's talk about Deerfield. Again, assuming the SBC accepts the recommendation of the subcommittee. So that would leave Deerfield being vacated by the students. So the school committee is going to take a look at that. And this is going back to the earlier slide, this is sort of contingent on the Sheehan project. So if the school committee recommends new construction for Sheehan in the other project we just talked about, then the school district will likely return control of Deerfield back to the town of Westwood. If the school committee, after the design study in about a year, would recommend an addition or renovation to Sheehan, then the school district will likely retain Deerfield to serve as temporary classroom or swing space while Sheehan is being renovated. And when the swing space is no longer needed, control of Deerfield will revert to the town. Either way, control of Deerfield, or if the recommendation isn't accepted and it ends up being another project, control of Sheehan, either way, eventually, I think control of the school building will revert to the town. And because of that, as Nancy mentioned, the select board has approved the creation of a committee to examine the potential town uses for the vacated school when control of the vacated school reverts back to the town.
May I, just for clarification, we haven't yet approved the creation of a committee. We will approve the creation of a committee.
I thought you approved the creation, you just hadn't formed the committee.
I don't think we took a vote on, I don't want to mislead.
Oh, okay, sorry.
We've discussed it.
Okay.
We've discussed it, but actual action would be when we go ahead and do it. So
okay.
just
so
say
do you know when
the select board will.
So just because we're going to need to tell the MSBA this, and they will be looking for confirmation, do you know when you would plan on taking that vote? Would it be?
I'm going to ask Chris to come on into the conversation. I think we can do it in June, but like everything, there's this cloud that hangs over everything. I'm very distracted with responding to COVID, so we need to get this put into our schedule. Chris, what would your thinking be on this? Because as May is saying, it's needed for July. Do you think we could do it mid-June?
We can certainly do it in June. Yes.
Okay, great. Because we will need that
yes,
for the PSR report. Okay, yeah, perfect. All right, so I will revise that slide, that bullet point. So that's Deerfield. Any discussion about Deerfield? Nope. Okay. So next steps. As I mentioned, June 4th, we have a community forum where we present to the community pretty much what we've just presented to you, the evaluation criteria and the recommended option. On June 11th, the school committee will be voting on two things. First, on which enrollment to accept, whether it's for the project, whether it's 315, 560, or 685. And then the school committee will also be voting on the redistricting issue. So those are two votes that will happen on June 11th. On June 12th, this committee meets again to discuss sustainability, to look at various options and make some decisions around sustainability. As I mentioned, the sustainability subcommittee will have met prior and will be able to make some recommendations to this committee on that issue. And then finally, June 19th, we meet again, and we have a preferred option and a vote for the preferred option and for the submission of the PSR to the MSBA.
Mayor, what time is the forum on the 4th?
It's at 7 p.m.
Okay, and 7 a.m. this morning.
Oh, I did? I was very tired at 8 a.m. So it's 7 p.m. in the evening. Then there is the, as I said, you can participate via Zoom or via phone. If you participate via Zoom, there's an opportunity to ask questions real time If you participate on the phone, I believe you can still ask questions. You just won't be able to see the presentation if you're on the phone.
Assuming this all moves forward, is there town vote needed to authorize funds for full AE services for the whole project? And when would that be done?
So the funding that we've gotten so far from the town is taking us through this feasibility phase and schematic design. So the next funding request from the town would be in the spring, this spring, a town meeting a year from now, where we would ask for the full funding for the project, for the rest of the project. But
So
we'll be through schematic design at that point.
But that would include, the town has not approved funding for permit construction drawings and full technical drawings.
No.
That's spring 2021 town vote?
Yeah, just through SD.
And then the town vote, when is it planned for the town vote to authorize construction, funds for construction of the building?
So that's all the same vote next spring.
Okay, thank you.
It's all one vote. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody again. So that's the recommendation. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to keep going on the agenda. So last chance. No? All right. So we have a few action items here. First is the approval of the school building committee meeting minutes from April 17th, 2020. Can I get a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I'm going to do a roll call. Ken Aries?
Yes to approve.
Brian?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
I think Sarah left. John Cummings?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
Pam?
Yes.
Abby?
Yeah.
Nancy?
Yes.
Lemma?
I think Lena had to hop off.
Oh, okay. Josepha?
Yes.
Carol?
Yeah.
Michelle?
Yes.
Tony had to hop off. Emily?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
And Maya approves. So motion is carried. Next, I need, I think I need to do this. I can do this as one motion, right, John? To approve the meeting minutes. Actually, maybe I need two. I need a motion to accept the meeting minutes of the March 31st, 2020 Evaluation Criteria Subcommittee.
So moved.
Second.
All right, Ken? Oh, sorry,
Yes.
any discussion? No. Ken?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
Chris? Chris?
Sorry, yes.
Thanks. John?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
Pam?
Yes.
Abby?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Lemma? Oh, sorry, Lemma's not here. Josepha?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Tony's not here. Emily?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
And I approve as well. Motion is carried. I now need a motion to accept the meeting minutes of the April 23rd, 2020 Sustainability Subcommittee.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, discussion? No. Ken?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Sarah is not here. John?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
Pam?
Yes.
Abby?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Lemma's not here. Josepha?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Tony's not here. Emily?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
And I approve. Motion carried. Now I need the approval for invoices. And we have Invoices totaling $78,961.25. These include an invoice from Compass for $18,670, an invoice from Doran Whittier for $56,791.25, and an invoice from Thornton Tomasetti for $3,500. Any questions or discussion about them? Nope. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Ken,
Yes to approve.
Brian,
Yes.
Allison,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Sarah's not here, John,
Yes.
Charlie,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
Abby,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Josepha,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Tony's not here, Emily,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
and I approve as well. Motion is carried. Finally, new business.
Woo.
Any new business? The end is in sight.
Can we talk about option one? No, just kidding. Good job.
We already did.
I know. Well, before we adjourn, I just want to thank everyone. This was a long meeting, longer than we had planned for. We threw a lot of information at you. You guys asked a lot of great questions. This is an ongoing conversation. So if you have any questions coming up, you can contact me or Emily or anybody. And we'll have more discussion. We'll have the community forum where people can raise questions. And so a couple more meetings before we have to vote. So I appreciate your help with this. So now I just need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Ken,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Allison,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Sarah's not here, John,
Yes.
Charlie,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
Abby,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Josepha,
Yes.
Lemma's not here, Carol.
I think she had to hop off.
Okay. Michelle,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
Tony's not here, Kate,
Yes.
and it's a yes from me. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you guys very much.
Yeah, good job.
Thank you.
Nice
Thanks,
job, everyone.
everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy Friday.